well. Anyway, long story short, an hour later, I fell, and the skate guards offered to take me in an ambulance to the hospital, but I declined that. And I highly recommend anyone who ever gets an offer to take an ambulance, take the ambulance, because I thought I could get home okay. And anyway, I got home and then I fell down my front steps and I finished the job on my ankle. So instead of, that's the end of the sad part. Okay. So instead of going on a 9-month wandering sabbatical, I spent 3 months on my back, foot raised, 2 surgeries. Doctor wasn't sure if I'd ever walk again. And it was the most depressing, demoralizing moment of my life. Instead of, um, I every day I canceled another reservation. I canceled ferries. I canceled flights. I called remote hotels in the desert in Morocco and explained to them that I'd had an accident and I wouldn't be coming. And it was terrible. It was so demoralizing. And I'm saying that now in a little bit of a context because I think a lot of us are having trouble with the fact that we're essentially, housebound in a lot of ways. And, um, anyway, so during that period, I was preparing a class that I was going to teach called The Writer and the Wanderer. And The Writer and the Wanderer was going to be books, stories that happened during journeys. So like Passage to India or Paul Bowles' Sheltering Sky, things that happen when people take a trip. And I was reading Death in Venice, and it was Easter Sunday. My husband is a journalist. He worked on Sundays. So I'm sitting home alone Easter Sunday reading Death in Venice. My daughter has gone on to Morocco without me. And I came to a passage in Death in Venice, which was he would go on a journey, not far, not all the way to the tigers. And I'm sitting on my couch having a pretty serious pity party, feeling very down. And I read that sentence and I literally could not move. It was like I had a moment of paralysis where I could hardly move anyway, but I literally was just frozen on that sentence. And I read it over and over again. He would go on a journey not far, not all the way to the tigers. And I memorized it right then. And I decided that when I could walk again, I would go all the way to the tigers. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if I literally meant tigers or if I didn't know really what I meant, but I knew that that was what I was going to do. And so I'm just trying to think it in terms of just how I want to continue talking about the book itself. Anyway, 3 years later, I finally was able to realize this dream of going to the tigers. But meanwhile, I spent a lot of time researching tigers and reading about tigers and learning all kinds of things about them. And one of the passages that's in the book, and if I may, I think I'll just read a very tiny passage, which is chapter 4, which once I started thinking about tigers, I started remembering the role that tigers had had in my life. One of the things, which is the chapter, the book is written in 112 short chapters. And the chapter 3 is about when my family and I would go to the circus and my father would have panic attacks in crowds. So we always had to leave before the end of the circus. We couldn't stay till the end because there'd be crowds. So the end was always the big cat act. And as a girl, I can still remember seeing the cages being set up and the animals being brought in. I mean, of course, now I find that completely repugnant, but as a girl, it was this exciting thing. And we always had to leave before the last cat act before that, so I always had this longing, for the big cats that I had to leave the circus before. And this is chapter 4. And as I was researching tigers started to become more and more into my mind. So this is, as a child, I had a tiger dream. I had it often and it was always the same. There is a tiger at the foot of my bed. He sits on his haunches, sharpening his claws on the bedpost. I stare at him. His claws extended, focused on his task. He is never in a hurry. His amber eyes are on me. When his claws are sharp, he gets into a crouch, as tigers do, and then he pounces. He springs through the air, and just before he lands on top of me, I wake up. Years later, I learned that you cannot dream your own death, but it never occurred to me that the tiger meant to kill me. He had something else in mind. Now, this was a dream that I had as a 4-year-old child, and I did never think that the tiger meant to kill me. I always thought it had something else in mind. And it wasn't until I went on the journey that I realized even what that sentence meant. You know, one of the things that people think about writers is we know what we're doing. And I actually never know what I'm doing. I mean, I don't even know what I'm doing right now as I'm talking to you. I mean, I kind of know what I'm doing, but you know what I mean? It's like, I mean, I spent a lot of time studying and learning about jazz musicians, and, you know, they improvise within a form. Right. So you have the form, but then, you know, there's a lot of a leeway and a lot of direction and places, you know, you can go. Anyway, what did it mean that the tiger had something else in mind? Well, it wasn't really till I got to India that I began to understand what I meant by that sentence. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey in India. And so first of all, the day I was leaving, I had a very sore throat, and I decided to ignore it. And I got sicker and sicker as as the flight went on and the trip went on. And by the time I got to the tiger reserves, where I was going to actually hopefully see tigers, I was very, very sick. So I did about 2 weeks of tiger safaris. And the first day, so the Jeep comes and gets you at 6 a.m. I have to say it was the coldest. I went in January, which I highly do not recommend going to India in January. It's as cold as New York, where I am right now, but they don't have heat and they don't have insulation. So it's as cold inside your house or room, wherever you're staying, as it is outside. So it was very, very cold, and I was very sick. And this Jeep comes at 6 a.m, and they pick me up, and I've got a thermos of tea, and I brought a hot water bottle from New York, and I'm very miserable. And there are no tourists, so I'm the only person in the Jeep, except for my driver. And we drove for about 45 minutes, and then you come to a place where you wait, and every Jeep gets a guide. It's required. You pay for the guide. So we wait, and this guy jumps in our Jeep after we wait about an hour. And my driver turns to me and says, "We got the best guide in India. You're so lucky." And I was like, oh my God, I got the best guide in India. So I'm going to learn something. Like he's going to tell me things and teach me things, and I'll learn, which I love to do. He didn't say a word to me, didn't say hello, didn't say anything. He just sat straight ahead. And every once in a while, he'd raise his finger like this, and the Jeep would stop, and he'd look around, listen. If I talked, he'd tell me to be quiet. And then we'd go, and I was like, I didn't, like, this is the best guide. Like, I don't understand why he's the best guide. You know, not only doesn't he, what is he doing? You know? So at one point, we'd been out a few hours. A really beautiful green bird flew by me on my shoulder that way. And Ajay, that was my guide's name, he was looking in a completely different direction. And I said, "Oh, what was that?" And just spontaneously. He said, "It was a green bee eater." And I said, "You didn't see it?" And he said, "I heard its wings." That was one of the first things he said to me. I heard its wings. And I thought, okay, I'm staying with this guy. Whatever he's hearing, he knows how to listen. And he became my guide for the first week that I was there. I had to bribe other guides not to be my guide. You had to give them some money because they were always in a line. But what Ajay taught me was how to listen to what was out there. And his gift was hearing. And one of the things that came to me in the writing of the book is that the word listen lives in the word silent, if you move the letters around. And I think that in order to really listen, we have to be silent. whether it's listening to our own feelings, our own hearts, or the natural world around us. But actually, as I was writing the book and I wrote down about the word silent, I looked at it and I saw the word listen. It's probably because I'm left-handed and somewhat dyslexic that the letters rearranged themselves for me, but it seemed like the right thing. And one of the things that I really got from that journey was listening and being silent. So I want to talk about tigers for a few minutes. Here's the thing about tigers. You don't actually look for tigers. You won't find them. So there's no such thing as a herd of tigers, a flock of tigers, a swarm of tigers. Anytime you see a photograph or image of tigers together, that's photoshopped. Tigers are solitary apex predators. A male tiger requires 100 square miles or square kilometers of territory for himself, right? I don't know what a female requires, but the male is definitely more on the prowl, and the female is, often taking care of cubs. They mate for 24 hours and then they don't have anything more to do with each other. The female, when she makes a kill though, will leave something for the male tiger so he doesn't kill his cubs. So they are very solitary. Okay. So I'm out with AJ and we're in the savannah and there's some movement in the bush pretty far away. And AJ says, "Oh, she's there. She's out there." And I said, "How do you know it's a female?" And he looked at me strangely. He said, "Oh, I don't know that if it's a female or male." But he explained that all unseen tigers are she. So the mysterious, lurking, beautiful creature out there is always female. Once they see it, they know if it's a male. Once they look at its pug prints, the paw print is different for a female versus a male. They don't know why, actually. I think the female is more round and the male is more oval. There's a slight difference in the paw print, so they can tell from that. But invisible, unseen, mysterious tigers are female. And that was when the tiger, yes, it was an animal and a creature for me, but it also became the artist, the woman, how it inhabited for me my own female sense of creativity and as an artist. So in the book, I'm writing about tigers, but I'm also writing about what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a woman artist, and that whole thing about silence and listening. So I think that's all I want to say about the book at the moment. I'd like to talk about my experiences as a travel writer, but are there any questions? I see something about listening to the birds in your neighborhood, Janet.
Yeah, raise your hand if you have a question, anybody.
Yeah, I'm happy to have a conversation.
Go ahead. We'll jump back.
Okay. So I'm not going to give away, everything that happens in the book, but I do want to talk a little bit about the process of writing the book, because I think it's sort of interesting to people. One of the things I've learned for myself about the creative process is it's a process. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to write a great book today and I'm just going to sit down and do that. Like, no. So the first draft of All the Way to the Tigers was 420 pages long. And it began with my accident in Brooklyn. And then it took me through other journeys and other travel. And then the last part was India. And I gave it to my agent. She sent it out to 10 publishers, including my own publisher, and everyone turned it down. So I got pretty down about that. I thought it was okay. And then I shared it with a friend. I think it's very good to walk away from your work sometimes, and I think it's good to share it with people. And it doesn't just have to be writing. It can be any kind of creative work you're involved in. And the other thing I do want to say about my process is that I don't write anything in order. So I don't write a beginning, middle, and an end. I write in pieces much more like a patchwork. And my feeling is, I think that writing to me is more like a painting where you're roughing out a form rather than trying to be, linear. And just because we read from the upper left going across doesn't mean we have to create that way. A painter would never start a painting in an upper right corner and go across unless that was the technique they were using. So why should a writer do that? So, one of the things, like, for example, the tiger dream I read to you, that was one of the first things I wrote, even though I had no idea where it would go in the book. So basically I have a question here. Okay. So I had all of these pieces of this book at a certain point, and I realized I had 4 threads. I had the story of my accident. I had the story of my trip to India. I had the pieces of my childhood. And then I had lots of little bits of tiger lore. And for example, one of them is that for Jan Martel, the tiger was the 3rd choice for The Life of Pi. He thought he would do an elephant, but he realized the elephant would sink the boat. And then he thought he would do a rhinoceros, and same problem with the rhinoceros. And then he came to the tiger. So again, in terms of process, I love the fact that the tiger wasn't his first choice. So that's like a little, so and then I had all these little tiger tidbits, like that male tigers will prey on their cubs. Okay. So I had these pieces and I didn't know how to organize them. So what I did with this book and what I've done with other books is I took each one of those threads, 4 threads, and I printed them on different colored paper. So my accident, I printed on white paper because it was winter. Everything about the tiger, I printed on yellow paper because I thought orange wouldn't look so good. Childhood was blue and tiger lore was green. So I had white, blue, yellow, and green, I think. And then I got a big table that I borrowed at a friend's. It was a ping pong table. We stayed at this friend's house and they had a ping pong table, and we do house swaps. So we go to people's houses, strangers' houses, and they come to our house. We've done it for 25 years. It's always been fantastic. So we went to this farmhouse and they had a ping pong table. And my husband came down one morning and he said, "Oh, I was taking the net off the ping pong table." And he said, "No, we need the net." And I said, "No, we're not going to play ping pong. I'm going to organize these pieces that I have." So I had all these different colored pieces and I started moving them around. And then I decided that the book had to start with a tiger, not with my accident. So, that's just my process. Okay. I don't worry about order when I'm writing, and I'm not afraid to throw things out. For those of you who are gardeners, you can cut anything back, you can take anything out, you can move anything around. So there shouldn't be any difference with a piece of work. So that was the process, and that's how I wrote it. And there was a moment where I decided that I wanted the book to be a tiger. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, so a tiger is a Rorschach test. So the tiger stripes are equal and even on either side, okay? So I wanted to have an even number of chapters. So 112 chapters became important to me. I also didn't know what to do with those little single sentence chapters. And I decided, okay, they're going to be the tiger stripes. If my book is a tiger, they'll be the stripes. So I wanted to organize them also in such a way that it just helped me organize my material and how I wanted to tell the story. If I don't remember the moment where I said the book is the tiger. I think there's a quote from Borges where it says something, it's in the book, where he says, there's a tiger, the tiger inside of me will destroy me, but I am the tiger. The tiger will destroy me, but I am the tiger. And I think that's kind of how I felt, that while I embrace the tiger as a real animal, it's also a metaphor for me for freedom and wildness and holding on to our passion, that part of us that's wild. And the other thing about tigers that I love is that they only succeed about 30% of the time in their hunts. The other 70%, they don't succeed. And just knowing that about tigers made me feel free to throw material out and say, okay, this 30% works, but this isn't going to work. And just, realize that everything we do is not going to work. I think we can be too hard on ourselves. Like, if we're painting or cooking or, sometimes things are just not going to work out. I always view my books like soup that has to render down and cook. That I throw a lot out, but how it kind of comes together is a little different. Are there any questions? Let's see. Don't forget to take us back to where you left off with what happened with the book after everyone. What? I'll never think of tigers in the same way again. I think someone wants to know if I saw a tiger. Is that the question?
Yes.
Oh, wait, don't forget to take us back where you left off after the book, everyone rejected it.
Yeah. Did you find a tiger? Everybody's going to want to know that. Or maybe they should read the book.
I'm not going to tell them.
Okay.
They have to read the book if I found a tiger. But the question here is actually, what did I do after the book was rejected 10 times? Well, I did what I always do, which is I revised it. I went back, I thought, okay, if one person says something, that's one person. But if 10 people are kind of saying the same thing, then it seemed to me that I needed to rethink it. So many artists and writers are afraid of revising. This is a much better book than the book I first sent around. So, the book I published earlier, The Jazz Palace, was rejected 37 times. And I went back and I revised it, and the editors were right. I was grateful that it got rejected 37 times because I think I published ultimately the right book. I mean, I don't think that we should write to the marketplace. I don't write in order to get, but it's a way, it's a conversation I'm having with the world when my editors are saying no. I have to think about, what's not working and why, Kathy, did you want to say something?
Yes. The thing that struck me is when I'm talking, and you talked about how your book cover was actually a character. So address that, but tell them what you do in real life too, at, what you told about teaching writing.
What do I do in real life, Kathy? I can't remember because I am not linear.
The class is on writing.
Yeah, so I teach creative writing at Sarah Lawrence College, and I also have a master class. And one of the things that I really try to work with on people is helping them find their subject matter, helping them find the stories that matter to them. And I have many, many examples of students who, I'll just give you one. I had a student a number of years ago who kept writing about his grandmother's farm. And they weren't very compelling. They were nice stories, but he kept writing about the same thing. And then at some point I said to him in a meeting, I asked if there was anything else that he wanted to write about. And he said, no, he really only wanted to write about his grandmother. And he said, because she raised me. And then he said, and because I couldn't be there for her when she died. And I was like, okay, why? Because that wasn't in any of the stories. And he said, well, I was a soldier and I was in active duty. I was deployed. And I said, could you write about that? Could you write about the context of being deployed and finding out that your grandmother was failing? And then he found his subject, and then he really started writing, and that was the moment. Jodi Picoult was my student. I'm sure many of you know her work. So she was my student at Princeton, and Jodi loves to tell this story. It's actually on her website, I think. She wrote a story that I thought was pretty good, but I thought that the pieces weren't in the right order. I thought that the scenes could be arranged differently. I'm a very story-focused writer, so I like the story to be, you know, at the top of the piece. Like I just finished reading Ha Zhen's novel Waiting that won the National Book Award in 1999. And it begins with, for years, Lin had been trying to divorce his wife. And I thought, you read a sentence like that and it's like, okay, like I'm interested in that, you know. So I thought it would be a good idea to have a class where I came in with a scissors and glue and a stapler, and we took a story of then Princeton College sophomore, Jodi Picoult, and moved the pieces around a little bit. So we did that, and I thought we made the story better. And a few days later, she came to my office and she said, I've been crying for 3 days. And I was like, oh my God, I said, I'm so sorry. I'm, you know, she said, well, she said, no one's ever touched my work before. I was just stunned that you did that. And I was like, I was a young teacher too. So I said, I really apologize. But I said, I think it made the story better. I think things needed to be moved around. And she said, well, I was valedictorian of my high school. And I said, everyone in Princeton was valedictorian. I don't care if you were valedictorian. I said, it's a better story if you move things around. So she worked on it and she sent it to Glamour. I think it was Glamour or 17, and they published it. And then she came back to me and she said, I have another story. And I said, let's work on it. And I worked with her on her thesis. So, you know, I think, you know, and I say this for any creative process you're involved in. I also paint. Anything you do, you can't be afraid of making, speaking a foreign language, okay? Like, you can't be afraid of making mistakes and making a fool out of yourself, because you're all going to make mistakes. That's the name of the game. And if you worry about, you know, like I speak a few languages, but I've been really working on my Italian, and I know I make mistakes all the time. But if I'm afraid to speak, then you won't speak. And also, learning a new language, by the way, has been shown to be one of the few things that prevents dementia. So it's always good to pick up a new language, I think. But anyway, I'm talking about mistakes and just not being afraid of making mistakes and not being afraid of just saying, you know, writing or whatever you're doing, you know, some things can't be rescued and some things can. And, you know, last Sunday, I said to my husband over dinner, I have what do you call it? A contract to write a book that's due in March. And I said to my husband over dinner, I'm gonna void the contract. I can't write this book. This is not the right book for me. And the next morning he said, okay, we're gonna do yes, no, maybe. You're gonna give me the book. And I had all the chapters flagged. And he went through the entire book. We started at 11 in the morning and I looked up, it was dark out. And he went through and he took out plot lines I didn't need, characters I didn't need, scenes I didn't need. And then I realized I had something really quite beautiful. And, you know, a lot of times as an artist or writer, I feel like a moving van came and dumped a whole bunch of junk in my living room. Some of it's junk, some of it's wonderful, and some of it, I don't know. But that my job as a writer sometimes is to like go through all the junk and figure out where things go and what to keep and what to get rid of. And I feel, you know, that is a really good metaphor for the creative process. And, you know, being nervous about your creativity or being afraid of making a mess or being afraid of making mistakes, that just will get in your way. You know, if you look at children play, they don't care about making a mess. You know, it's nice that they can clean it up, but you know, so that's kind of what I wanted to say about process. Are there any process questions or anything, you know?
Raise your
anything?
Kathy, you're on mute.
on. Oh, okay, I had it. Okay.
Oh, we have.
Oh, go ahead, Janet. Janet, you've got your hand up.
Oh, I put my hand up. I guess you can see me. Yeah, I'm really interested in how you're writing as well, because I also write in scenes. Sometimes I'll have maybe the opening idea, but I will go and jump in and figure out where I'm going to put it in later. So I like that process. I think sometimes you try to find the story thread too. I started a new novel that's going to be set here in the Pacific Northwest in 1943, and I have all the facts, but I just couldn't, and I know what I want to write about. It's women manning the fire towers, but I just couldn't find the story course. So I went back to something I'm familiar with, which is Norway in World War II, and I'm so fired up. And I know that I have an opening scene. I actually have the second chapter, but I might go ahead and write the ending, or I might write, you know, I have an interesting character popping into my head. So I might go spend time with that character and explore it, and then come back to the other character, because I know this other character very, very well. So I like that idea of process.
Is the Norway connected to the Pacific Northwest story, or are they two separate?
They're two separate things. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and that was the interesting thing, is that I was all fired up about this Pacific Northwest. It'll be the third in a series that I have written about here. I wrote about the Civilian Conservation Corps, women climbing mountains in 1907. I thought this is perfect, because it's good to have like a trio of books that brings some of the characters from the very first into really technically almost 38 years later.
Right.
But I suddenly couldn't do it. And I will think about it. I need to figure out, you know, some of the characters. I found out they had an Army Corps that was dedicated to forestry. So that'll fit into that novel, but I just couldn't do it. And all of a sudden, boom, I'm off. And I'm really pepped up about it. So it's,
I think you have to do what fires you up. You know, I think you have to do that. And yes, it is a tin ceiling, by the way.
Yeah.
Your question? Yes.
Yeah.
Original tin ceiling.
That's wonderful. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Old
I'm
house.
just going to interrupt because we're running out of time, and it's Janet Charles who had her hand up. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Janet.
that's okay.
That's okay. Doug unmuted me. I thought that Annie, well, first of all, I love what you said about the different colored paper. I thought that was such an interesting idea. Annie from the Write Review asked a question. I think it goes back to, you said that you'd sent the book out and then you got your feedback. And so she asked, how did you know that you were finished writing the book? When you took the manuscript back and thought about it again, what was your process?
You know, it's a little bit like being asleep at the wheel. I can't quite explain it. It's not, you know, I'm not, I mean, it's a good question. How do you know when something's done?
You know, Mary, it's kind of like a painting. People ask you, how do you know when you're done? You just know. Is it kind of like that?
You know, it's funny. I'm thinking about what my daughter's second grade teacher said to her when she put up an art show, and the art was incredible. And we said, "Oh my God, how do you get them to do this art?" She says, "Well, I don't really get them to do it. I just know when to take it away from them." And I feel like maybe that's what, you know, I think I know when it's done when I lose interest in it. And it kind of, I always remembered that, because I thought, you know, maybe that's a lot of the process, is knowing when to take it away. It just feels done, you know.
Mary, we have 2 minutes, and so is there anything you want to bring in at the very end before we introduce our next author?
Well, I do want to say something. I did a Daily Beast article on this, and you could certainly Google it. It's really about surviving this moment that we're living in. And I have a practice because, first of all, I was under house arrest in Cuba years ago. And then I was obviously, you know, homebound again for this book. And one of the things I do every day is I start my day with my journal. And I write 3 things in my journal. What do I have to do today? What do I want to do today? And what can I do for someone else today? And those 3 things have really helped me get through this period. because there's stuff you just have to do. There's things you want to do for yourself. And then I try to end the day with, who could I reach out to? Who could I, you know, send something to, write a note. So that's really helped me get through this moment. And a lot of the book is about me having a pity party, being locked down. So yeah, I hope you get a chance to read it. I hope those of you who want to get to India will get to India, or will get to wherever your dreams take you, really.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary Morris. I want you guys to watch her interview on my Kathy L. Murphy YouTube channel, because the part about the paper was a real eye opener for me, using the colored paper. And I talk about how Fannie Flagg has a different kind of process. But thank you so much. All the Way to the Tiger by Mary Morris. There's so many aspects to this book that I'll read it again. And I am still going to the Tiger Creek Reserve. I almost stopped and took a picture the other day. I was driving by, but as soon as it gets a little better here, COVID's raised its ugly head, I will be going to the Tiger Reserve and sharing that with everybody. So thank you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you for everything.
I just absolutely love you, and I love this book. And when I go to India, I'm going to be really thinking about you. So
take me with you, honey. Thank you, guys.
Thank you
very
so
much. Well, be safe, everyone.
Well, all right. Now we're going to introduce our next author. I'm really excited.
Kathy, you're muted.
I don't know what happened there, but our next author is Boo Walker, and he is an author that I almost had here a time before, and then he took a new job. But interestingly enough, he is in Spain now. So we have another author reporting in from Spain, and you'll hear all about him. He has a fascinating picture that I showed on our photo album of him typing underwater that I want that image in my house. Something about it, you know, I was a lifeguard and raised in the, in the pool. My dad managed the city pool. I'm going to replicate that one of these days. But anyway, Boo, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes. I'm trying to find you on the screen. Where are you?
I'm the guy in the crown and the green robe.
I see you now, Boo. Well, thank you for coming on board. I know it's a different total time zone. So it's amazing to me that we're getting all these people from, Paris, France. And where are you in Spain?
I'm in Valencia. So I'm 7 hours ahead of you.
Fantastic. Well, we want to hear all about An Unfinished Story. You've got to read Boo's books, but this is the one that we picked for this year. And I'm going to let you share the story behind this story.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I guess everybody can hear me if Kathy can hear me. Well, I want to back up a little bit before that story, because I was thinking about what I wanted to say today. I guess it's the morning where you guys are. I have to admit, if you can see this, it's beyond happy hour here, or a late lunch in Spain. But I was thinking about what I wanted to say, and I was really thinking about what Kathy meant to me and when she came into my life. And, we all know Kathy maybe loves books more than anyone in the world. And I so appreciate that about her. And I was going to say back when I was a nobody, I'm still a nobody, but back when I was really a nobody and I was still trying to figure out my way in the writing world, I guess I can say I make a living as a writer now. So I've done something. But when I was really trying to figure things out, I started out writing thrillers. And gosh, when was this? Back in the early 2000s, maybe 2001, I started writing thrillers, and I wrote 3 thrillers, which are now under a pen name, Benjamin Blackmore. And there was something, I really enjoyed them. And I was a giant fan of Nelson DeMille and John D. MacDonald, and Harlan Coben grabbed me towards the end of my thriller writing days. And I was like, who could write a page turner like that? And then somewhere along the lines, I moved out west from Charleston, South Carolina, and I planted grapevines and I fell in love with a beautiful Floridian actually who was living in Seattle. So I moved all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast and met this Floridian. And I started finding a softer side. And I think as we started to talk about family and we started to talk about adopting our son Riggs, all of a sudden kidnapping and some of the darker stuff was a little bit too deep. And I just couldn't, it wasn't interesting to me anymore. I just didn't want to go down that road. I didn't want to possibly think about my family being hurt. So I started to think about what else interested me. And I was living in this vineyard area in Eastern Washington State. And it was super interesting, really. This thing was bubbling up inside of me, this story. Basically, if you live in Eastern Washington State and you're in the middle of nowhere, really for the sole purpose of making good grapes, good wine, you've got to be a pretty interesting character. And, you know, you're either running from something or you're chasing something, you're missing something inside, or you have this beautiful artistic side that needs expressing, that you need to be here. And you're really, in a way, you're saying, well, I don't need to be close to restaurants. I can live out in the middle of nowhere in the country. I'm willing to do all that to be in this place that means so much to me. And if you're that kind of person, and if you have 50 or 100 people like that, all of a sudden the characters start to butt heads, but they also start to fall in love. And there's this really wonderful thing that happens, and which I would say is story. And there is a ton of it. And so I said to my agent at the time, I want to leave the thriller world and write something that matters to me and is a little bit deeper to me. And so I wrote a book called Red Mountain. And I really didn't know what I was doing, but I'll tell you how this kind of pulls back to Kathy is the weirdest circumstances. A woman named Leila Meacham, who probably a lot of you guys know, was on a cruise, on a steamboat cruise through the Columbia River about the time I was thinking about leaving Thrillers. And she met my wife and she met my family. She didn't meet me, but my wife was on the boat to meet her parents who were on the boat with Leila. And Leila said, something tells me I should talk to you, Michaela. Michaela's my wife. And they ended up speaking for a long time. And sure enough, Leila lives in San Antonio. A couple of weeks later, we spoke on the phone. And if you've known Leila, if you've read her book, she's my mentor. She's probably the most magical person ever. And she basically said, I think you've got something deeper within you and you need to chase it and you need to follow it. And if your agent wants you to write another Gone Girl type story, then you should probably just move on and you should write what's in your heart. And I listened to Leila because she was pushing me and she said, you need to not only tell deeper stories, but you need to chase your craft harder. And so that's what I did. And I still, even this morning, I sent her the first 4 paragraphs of my book that releases this year. And I said, will you please help me? I'm stuck on a couple of things. So she's been my teacher and mentor and maestro since I've met her. And of course, she is a Pulpwood Queens alumni, and she means a great deal to Kathy. And the other person that popped into my world about that time is when I finally decided to take a chance and write Red Mountain. I sent it into the Pulpwood Queens and just kind of was thinking, gosh, you know, what a dream that would be. And sure enough, I hear back from Kathy. And when was that? 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And it's been really such a dream to know Kathy and get to know everybody that's associated with Kathy. And she's helped my career in such an amazing way. So I ended up from there. So thank you, Kathy. Thank you very much for having me. And I'm sorry I couldn't make it last year, but this is kind of more fun. I mean, who else is going to get me in a bathrobe and pajamas and a crown or a tiara? So as far as I've got a few more minutes to somehow get to my story, an unfinished story. I wrote Red Mountain and it struck a chord, and not only with me, but with readers. And for the first time, I started receiving notes from folks that were a little bit deeper than, hey, I read your thriller and it grabbed me at the beach and I couldn't put it down, which meant everything to me at the time. But then people started writing and saying, you really touched my heart. And you showed a side of myself that I was trying to find. And that to me was the greatest feedback in the world. And though I had not intended on writing another, I ended up writing a sequel and then a third book and then a prequel. And today I'm announcing for the first time ever that I think I've got to just keep writing this story. It's starting to feel like a fourth and a fifth. It's starting to feel like I'm writing an Irish country doctor series or a Maeve Binchy series. And I think I've realized that I'm just going to keep writing this series until I die. But in the meantime, what I found after Kathy was an incredible publisher by way of Lake Union. And Lake Union publishes, Beyond a Scarlet Sky, which was the really big hit, and Catherine Ryan Hyde, and When We Believed in Mermaids. And I've been working with them. My second book with them comes out in August. But the book that Kathy chose for this weekend is called An Unfinished Story. And I think it's the best book I've ever written. I was really, to be honest, I was a little bit afraid to write after I was a little bit afraid to write after the Red Mountain series because I found these characters that spoke so deeply to me. And I had this setting that I'd been living in, and it was just perfect. And it felt like it was really different. And it was almost like I started to feel like one of those characters that, let's say you're in the West Wing and you play, 6 seasons and you're a little bit worried what you might do afterwards. And I was a little bit afraid that I might be a one-trick pony in that way after that. Like maybe I should just continue that series and not do anything else. But it turned out that was just fear. And I think any authors that are listening out there, probably all of us, not just authors, realize that fear is such a thing that we just have to tackle. So anyway, as I was trying to open myself up to new stories, I had moved from Washington State to Florida, and we lived in this 1920s house not far from where Frank Sinatra and Babe Ruth and a lot of really interesting people in St. Pete had lived. And there was just this magical presence to this house. And as a matter of fact, an opera singer had built it, and we just fell in love with it. We've just left to move to Spain. But the front door, I was always captivated by who would knock at the front door. And I started to think about, what if a widow knocked on the door and she had a book in her hand? And I thought, well, what if this book was her deceased husband's book and it was unfinished? And I thought, okay, well, what if she had found this book and she's in a deep state of grief and she thinks, what would happen if I could get that book finished? Maybe then I could heal myself and find a way through the grief. Well, okay, then who would that make me as an author? And I started to think, okay, well, I'd have to be somebody going through a midlife crisis of sorts. I'd have to be somebody that was a big deal, or otherwise, why would she knock on my door? So I started to imagine this guy named Whitaker Grant. And I could see this guy that was, in his late 30s, and he had written, he's a one-hit wonder in a way. He'd written something that won a lot of awards, not quite a Pulitzer, but maybe a National Book Award 10 years ago for a book he wrote. And he's been stuck in writer's block ever since. And he wakes up every day and he pretends to write. He fights through it. He's strangled by fear. And all he wants to do is just write a follow-up and prove that he's worthy. And he's so infatuated by the idea of coming out of it that his wife has left him years ago. He's wearing, oddly enough, he looks a lot like me. He's in a bathrobe. He barely gets dressed. He barely showers. And he's lost direction. And then all of a sudden the doorbell rings and he walks up to the door and this woman is holding a book. And he's so damn hard-headed that he doesn't realize that the story he's been searching for 10 years is in her hands. And instead he thinks, I don't want to be a ghostwriter. I don't want to write the last 30% of a book that your husband, who's not even an author, writes, his little hobby. And then I thought, of course, well, what's going to happen between those two? And that's where An Unfinished Story came from. And no doubt it probably hit me at the right time because I was starting to face the idea of writing for a living myself. And I started to understand the pressures involved. You dream your whole life of being a writer. And once you do it for a living, you realize oh, well, I've got to be creative in a moment's notice. And that's a whole new world that you don't realize that you're diving into. And so for me, it was a super cathartic experience. And without a doubt, I wrote it. I felt high half the time writing it, and I felt really connected to the muse. And I'm really happy to share it. And I'm so happy that Kathy liked it, and we're vibing, and I'm happy to be here.
I am thrilled about this book. I'm thrilled about you as a writer, and I'm so glad we connected virtually. It's a wonderful story. We're going to have to get you over here and get you in person, but we'll be featuring you through our online book club, and we'll get you hosting Breathless Bubbles and Books. We will, but you need to read the story. It ties in so much to our theme. It's all about the story. But before you go, I don't know if I missed this before about you and Leela, but I've been trying to get a hold of her now for months because, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you all this, but Leela Meacham won our Hopeful Queen Book of the Year. Leela Meacham is battling pancreatic cancer. I have been trying to get a hold of her and her publisher, no response. Saturday afternoon, we're giving this award. So Boo, I don't know if you can get a hold of her and let her know that she won for Dragonfly, but she is our winner and I can't get a hold of her.
That's great. We communicate often, so I'll let her know. She's the biggest warrior I've ever known. She is doing chemo treatments, it seems like every single Monday. And while at the same time just finished her first draft of her newest story, April Storm,
I know.
While fighting neuropathy of the fingers. So she truly is my great inspiration, and I'll let her know. And I hope everybody reads her book. She's a master.
Contact me because we're going to give that award. If anything, because you know her, maybe you could accept the award on her behalf. I don't know. We'll talk later. Email me. But thank you. We're going to be going, just a wonderful story, you guys, an unfinished story. And the Leela Meacham connection, the connections we make at Girlfriend Weekend, and the authors that you all bring to me. I would have never heard of Mary Morris if not for Carolyn Leavitt. And then I would not have heard of Boo Walker on a cruise. Can you imagine? Leela Meacham.
I know.
This is, I feel like these things don't happen, by chance. I feel like people are put in your path. And that's our story and your story and the continuing story, the never-ending story. So thank you for being here all the way from Spain. And now we hope you stay on board, and we hope you'll watch as much of this as you can, because we have a lot of things happening and a lot of wonderful things like this being revealed. But our next—
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you so much. I just appreciate it.
And can I say one quick thing? If Carolyn is listening, I just read her book and it was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. Beautiful.
Oh, I've got all her books. I can't wait to read it. It's called April. The new
Carolyn Leavitt, With or Without You, or I'm put on the spot.
Oh, you're talking about Carolyn Leavitt. I thought you meant Leavitt.
Yeah. No. I'm sorry, Karen Leavitt. I really loved her.
She'll be on with Jana Blum for A Mighty Blaze coming up. So check the program. You should jump on board. But right now we're heading on down. We're back in Texas, okay? From Spain to Texas. I have now coming on board. And we don't change, right? We're still on the same Zoom meeting, right?
Yeah, we're on the same one, and he's all ready.
All right. Well, this is one of my dearest friends, the co-host for the past many years, Reavis Z. Wortham, who is a New York Times bestselling author. And I'd already booked him as my co-host for 2022. So we'll continue with that. It may be virtual. It looks like, Reavis. Yeah, I know. It's all up in the air, but they were saying we would know by spring if we could use this venue. Now they're saying they may not know until fall of 2021. We don't know what's going to happen, but Reavis will be on board as the co-host. Reavis is the funnest co-host in the world because he always makes me laugh. He's witty, he's fun, and he just screams Texas, doesn't he, y'all? He just is a wonderful person, a fantastic writer. And I know you're going to be talking about your next book, but I want you to end with what we're going to be doing in 2022 with you and your buddies. So I'm going to turn the program over to you and let you talk.
Thanks, Kathy. I sure appreciate that. You know, whether we get out to South Carolina or not, I'm going to be there along with my very best friend, John Gilstrap, and another good friend, Jeffrey Deaver, who are going to be with us virtually or in person out in South Carolina. We've rented a house out there just not far away from the Pat Conroy Center. So we're going to be there for about a week, just enjoying the weather instead of being cold in this part of the world, which it is right now. It's cold and windy here in Texas, but I sure appreciate all y'all tuning in. It's good to see. I see a lot of familiar faces out there, and I'm always excited about being here talking to all y'all. You know, you just said a minute ago, Kathy, you said people are put in your path at the right time for the right thing. First time I heard about Pulpwood Queens was through a very good friend of mine who I started teaching with over 40 years ago. Good Lord. But he wound up being my boss, the superintendent of Garland Independent School District, and I worked directly under him as the executive director of communications there. And his wife is a high school principal. And so she had been to one of the Pulpwood meetings in Jefferson, one of the conventions in Jefferson, and came back telling me, she said, you have to reach out and find this gal that runs this thing. She says she's a lot like you. She's got one bubble off plumb, but she's fun, and you need to visit with her and talk to her and get to know her. And so because of that, I reached out to Kathy and we talked. I think it was by telephone back then, wasn't it, Kathy? I don't believe we did any. We might have emailed, but we talked. We had a great time together, and then I went out there and got myself a haircut while we were talking not too long afterwards. And so Kathy's been a very good friend of mine, and she has really worked hard to help promote my career, because I started in 2011 writing novels with my first novel, The Rock Hole, which was just recently re-released by Source Books. And they redid the cover. They re-released that book, and so it's back out again. And I think it's doing really well. But I came out that year after it released and talked to Kathy, and we've been working really hard together to make all of our dreams come true, and yours too. You know, those of you that are authors understand how hard she works for all of us. You know, Kathy's always looking for the next rung on a ladder so that we can all move forward. And that's exactly what we try to do. And that's what I tried to do with The Rock Hole when I first wrote that one. And I've been writing newspaper columns and magazines columns for many years, since 1988. Guys, I have written over 2,000 newspaper and magazine columns to date. And it hasn't slowed up. I've been writing since 1988. That's 33 years writing a column and trying to put something out once a week. And because I was able to do that, I polished my craft. I polished what I was doing. You write every day. Those of you that are not authors and you're interested in learning to write, the first thing you do is this is the best advice I can give anyone. And I do whole workshops on this, or did before COVID, whole workshops around the country on this. People would come up to me and say, I'm going to write. I'm going to be a novelist. I'm going to write a novel. And I said, well, have you started yet? Well, no, I haven't, because I've got a wife or a husband or kids, or I've got a job, and I just don't have the time. And I've just look at these people and say, you have the time. You really do. How often do you sit down and look on your phone at Facebook? That's writing time. How often do you watch TV? How often do you watch the news, for crying out loud? You know, if you're sitting there doing that, then you have writing time. I wrote my first newspaper columns sitting in meetings where I should have been listening, but I was bored to tears because I didn't want to be in those particular meetings to begin with. So I would write the newspaper columns there on a yellow legal pad, by the way, and then I would come back and key them in on an old 286 computer. Y'all remember the floppy disks that we used to use on those things? And I would key them in on the floppy disk, and then I would print them out on a tractor drive. I mean, this technology has changed dramatically over the last few years. And today I don't need to do that. You don't need to do that if you want to be a writer. You have laptops. You can sit down and write anywhere. I have literally been at a stoplight and written a paragraph by hand on the console of my pad on the console of my truck because something popped into my mind. If you want to be an author, you can write. All you have to do is put your rear in a seat. That's the hard part. You carve out that 10, 15, 20 minutes. You know, Echo's nodding her head because she's been there. She understands that. You learn to do these things because you want to write. And after you get that first one out of the way, the first one's always the hardest because we learn through that. And then you write the next one and the next one. And so I wrote The Rock Hole, I got it out. And then all of a sudden, as soon as that novel came out, my publisher sent me an email and said, when we see the next manuscript for the next book. I didn't think that would happen like that. Now I don't have any downtime. While this book is out, I am having to write the next book. And so I fell into a routine of writing these novels as the days progressed. And now, and granted, I retired after 35 years. I had time to write, but I had streamlined the process by that point. And so then here I am now. I've got a contract for more and more books. I'm writing these things and I write every single day. I try to write it, and I try to write 1,000 words per book that I'm working on. Now that kind of sounds a little weird to you, but I work on more than one manuscript at any time. And so some days, right now I'm working on 4 manuscripts, and one of them is going to rise up here pretty quickly and take over. And so I try to get 1,000 words per manuscript. Now do the math on that. That's 4,000 words a day. People look at me terrified that they have to write 250 words a day. But once you get into the routine and it starts to flow, then you can go with it. And I've told, a lot of you have heard me say this, I don't plot, I don't outline, which just drives people nuts. I was sitting at a table with John Gilstrap and Jeffrey Deaver one day talking about writing. And Jeffrey is a plotter. He plots. His outline is 140 pages long, guys. I mean, that's almost the novel itself. I can't do that. I don't outline. I just sit down and put my fingers on the keyboard and start typing because I have a tiny little grain of an idea, a tiny little grain that pops into my head, which leads us to the new book that just came out. We were just talking about Laying Bones. Laying Bones is very, very loosely based on the truth. And I mean, again, we're talking about that little grain. It takes place in my novel, it takes place in 1969. But the actual event that I used as the foundation for Laying Bones took place in 1964 when my dad's best friend and interestingly enough, first cousin, so they grew up together in the river bottoms of Lamar County, Northeast Texas. Those two boys grew up together. My dad's best friend was his cousin, and they both were drafted to go overseas in World War II. They went to fight in the Pacific Theater. Now, you would think that two guys from a community of 500 people would not see anyone they know once they got to Japan. Dad was part of the occupying force once they dropped the bomb. Dad was on a troop ship off the coast of Japan. He was the invasion force. He was sitting there waiting to board landing craft at some point within the next 2, 3, 4 weeks when Japan surrendered. Well, my dad then lands in Japan, part of the occupying force in Tokyo. About 2 weeks after he gets there, he's standing at attention with his squad, and another squad comes marching by. My dad looks over and sees his cousin from thousands of miles away from a rural cotton community marching past. Now, my dad, I didn't know him that way when he was young, but my dad was pretty impetuous back in those days. And in fact, he was quite a rounder. I found out after he passed away. A lot of people gave me great stories about him. But Dad broke ranks, which you don't do, rushed across this area where they were standing, grabbed my cousin. They were screaming, yelling. They wrestled each other to the ground in front of their commanding officers. And then once they got up, they got separated. My dad tells me, he said, well, I got a little bit of trouble. And I said, was it worth it? He said, yeah, hugging RB was worth it because he and I sat and peeled potatoes for the next 2 weeks on KP duty. And they got to talk and visit. Now, is that great or what? Well, they came back home after the war and they brought those experiences, those mental experiences with them. They didn't know about PTSD back then. My dad handled it pretty well. Dad packed everything away. You didn't hear about it very often. The only things my dad told me about being in the Pacific Theater and fighting the Japanese were the funny things that he experienced. And I loved hearing those stories. But RB couldn't shake what he'd seen, what he'd heard, and what he had to do. And so RB came back and he spent most of his off time across the river in Oklahoma in the honky tonks that were over there, drinking until he couldn't hardly walk. And he would come back home, and he was possessed by those demons for so long. And because of that, RB, he became known not as an alcoholic, but as a heavy drinker. And then one night in 1964, he was trying to drive back home. This is the story that I heard growing up. He was coming back home drunk, tried to cross a small bridge in the river bottoms to go to his house, went off the bridge, rolled his car, and drowned in an inch of water. That's where they found him the next morning. And that just devastated my dad. Dad, he to the day he died, and dad was suffering from some dementia when he died, but he was still asking about his cousin RB because he loved him so much. Well, I was at another funeral, and if y'all are from the country, you know how country funerals are. Everybody comes from everywhere, and it seemed like there were 100 relatives out there at this funeral. We were standing outside after the service talking, and one of my cousins mentioned, you know, I sure do miss your dad. I said, yeah, I miss him too. And he said, your dad was a great guy. He said, I remember stories of him and RB running around. He said, I remember the time him and RB stole a police car from a highway patrol officer one night. Now, my dad, you know, that was a shock. And I had to get that story, which is great. I don't know when I'm going to use it, but I will one of these days. But he and RB actually stole a highway patrol car away from an officer that pulled him over. And they drove off and left the guy behind them. My dad driving the police car, my cousin RB driving the truck, and they got away and never did get caught. I guess the statute of limitations is over on that one. But he was telling me this story, and we were talking about RB and my dad. And I said, yeah, just like to kill dad when RB died in that wreck, and he drowned in that creek bottom. And my cousin, who is much older than I am now, he's in his 80s, middle 80s. He looked at me and he said, Rev, RB didn't drown in that creek. He said, I said, well, I heard that there was water in it. He goes, yeah, there was water on the other side, but he was on the dry ground. He said, he might've been a little damp. He said, but he didn't drown. He said, I was a deputy sheriff at the time. I saw the autopsy. He was murdered. And I just looked at him and I said, what? He goes, there was no water in that boy's lungs. He said, something happened across that river and he wound up dying over it. I left, and on the driving back home, it's an hour and a half back home, the whole novel, The Laying Bones, came to my mind, and I based all of it on that situation. Like all authors do, we wonder what if, don't we? We think, what if this had happened? Well, I had that idea. I came back and I'm looking at a Google map, and Google Maps are great for some things. You have to go to a place to truly write about it. You need to get out and you need to walk around and talk to people and breathe the air and feel the ground under your feet. I have a very good friend that writes novels here in Texas. Only problem is he's only been to Texas one time, and he gets so many things wrong. And I do my best to bring him along. What am I going to say? He's a best-selling author. People love it. So I can't say much, but I think you need to be out there. But anyway, I'm looking at this Google map, and I see the Red River. Now, the red is the border between Oklahoma and Texas, and it's somewhat tamed by a couple of dams. But when it rains up here, and when it rains, it pours. Not too long ago, we got like 15, 16 inches of rain. The river went out of the banks. And when the Red River gets out of its banks, it squirms to wherever it wants to go. It follows another path of least resistance. And there are places in Texas where, even though the river is the border, there are pieces of Oklahoma on our side, if you truly look at the boundary map. Now, these are little orphan strips of land. They're usually sandbars, or about half a mile of land that is owned by Oklahoma, but it's on the Texas side, and you truly can't get to it. And so I got to thinking, now, writers are always trying to figure out how to be bad guys, how bad guys think. And we get kind of close, but the bad folks that I've talked to, we can't get inside their heads at all. But writers think, well, what if this happened? Well, what if a group of bad guys decide they want to build a honky tonk on the Texas side of the river, but on Oklahoma land, and Oklahoma refuses to try and regulate this little piece of land because it's so hard to get to. Texas refuses to do it. And this is all based on the truth because Texas and Oklahoma have been arguing for years about these little orphan pieces of land. So what if somebody built a honky tonk there and they can do what they want to, and they open it up to alcohol, they open it up to gambling, and then they do what they want to. I know my distant cousin RB went to those places, and I thought, I'll bet he would love to have gone over there to drink on his own, to shoot dice, because that's what they were doing back in those days. They learned to shoot dice on those troop ships, waiting to go to whatever country they went to, whatever theater they went to. So those guys shot dice. And I remember them shooting dice up when I was a kid, behind the domino hall, or inside the domino hall sometimes. And so I tied all that stuff together from my childhood and wove it into Laying Bones. And again, I have the same cast of characters I've had throughout my Texas Red River series. I've got Top and Pepper, who are now 14 or 15. Pepper is driven by hormones. Top has not reached that level yet, but Pepper falls in love. Top's trying to figure the world out, and they hook up with a set of twins that were baked in hell. These kids are not the kids you want your kids to be around. And Pepper falls in love with a boy. Top's infatuated with a young lady, but these kids are heavily in drugs. And so at some point later on, and I won't give you all the details, but at some point they slip Top some acid. Now, if y'all have ever read any of my Red River books, Top has this ability to see into the future, but not very well. He can never define what he's seeing. Well, this little acid trip that he gets into sets the whole world spinning. And so that is essentially the basis of Laying Bones. And I finished it about the time COVID started locking us down, and got that over to my folks over at the Source Books, and they got printed up, and we started really moving on that. But because we were locked down, I don't know about the rest of you writers, but I thought it was absolutely glorious. I didn't have to go anywhere. I didn't have to do anything. I sat and wrote. Guys, I've written 3 complete manuscripts in the last year, and I've got another one halfway going. One of them came from a dream. I woke up one night with this weird Western idea, a dream that I dreamed all the way through. I came in and sat down at my computer at 4 o'clock in the morning and wrote about 10,000 words before my wife woke up. I finished the whole novel in 6 weeks. And now my publishers and my agent are scratching their heads because this is something they've never seen before. And why not? It came out of a dream. So let's just flow with it and see what we can get. So Kathy, you're going to see something called Comancheria at some point, along with a novel that I just finished up. It's a prequel in the Red River series. It's called Tom Bell. And we find we learn about Tom Bell, one of my main characters in the Red River series. Tom Bell's a retired Texas Ranger in the current series, but we go all the way back to 1931, 32, and we see Tom as a young man in your part of the world, Kathy, out around Liberty City and Gladewater during the oil boom. And I think that one's really going to catch some attention also. So that's how Laying Bones came about, though. And you'll see Ned Parker and as Constable, John Washington's back, Miss Becky, the whole crew is back. And we're going to follow these guys. I have an apparently unlimited contract with Poison Pen and Source Books to continue on with this series as well as another one. So the Red River series is going to continue into the future. I'm not sure if I'm going to get all the way into the mid 70s with it, because the 70s were a little weird anyway for a lot of us. Some of it I remember, some of it don't. But I would like to go back and drop books between the books that are already out there, because when I started writing, each book was a year. So one book was 64, 1965, 1966. Well, I felt that I missed a lot of growing up for these kids. So now I'm going to go back and plug in other books in the series. So that's where I am right now. That's how this is all going. And I hope all of y'all out there that support my Red River series and my Sunny Hawk series like what I'm doing. I'm always looking for feedback from everybody. I'm proud. Since I saw you guys, I won another Spur Award from the Western Writers Association. So thank you for that's for my 3rd book in the series, Hawk's Target. And the fourth book in the series, Hawk's Fury, takes place down on the southern border of the state of Texas, down in Rio Grande. It crosses over into Mexico. And it is up for consideration also for a third Spur Award, which I'm not even going to cross my fingers hoping for something like that. 3 in a row, 3 in 3 consecutive years is unheard of. But you know what? It's fun. It's what I get to do. I get to meet so many of y'all. You know, I can see a few of you right here. You know, Echo's there, and Bobby and Johnny and Betty and a lot of others that I've met. And you guys are very dear to me. This is the thing I miss about what we're forced to do right now is I miss sitting down with you guys and talking. You know, I miss visiting with you and finding out what's going on in your life and in your world, because I'm interested in everyone and everything. And if I can't get with you guys, it leaves a hole that's hard to fill, which is the reason, you know, Gilstrap and Deaver and I are doing these things together. You know, we're very careful about it, but we're renting house. We'll have a house in Hilton Head in a few months. We're going to go sit and just talk. We Zoom all the time, but actually sitting and visiting with each other, as you know, is completely different. You know, I'm talking to you from my office right here. Most of y'all are talking from your houses and your rooms. I see a couple of those virtual backgrounds out there, which I think are cool. But, you know, we bought this house and built it, added onto it and renovated it about a year ago. I want to show you my office, guys. Hang on just a second. Take this ride with me. I have 16-foot ceilings in here.
He built those.
I had them built by a cabinet maker here in Prosper, Texas, who is absolute genius. And one of my favorite parts over here, I don't know if you can see it. This is my ladder. You know, if people love books, they love being able to climb up on a ladder to get up there and just to experience that wonderfulness. My daughter is a high school librarian, and I made her decade, because when we moved all these books over here and unboxed them, she got to put them up on the shelves, and she had more fun doing that. And in fact, she's 32. You know, I call her my redhead. She's 32 years old, but she was sliding back and forth on this ladder like Harry Potter. I mean, she was just having a great time up there. And so, you know, books have been my life. Books are your lives. You all understand that. You know, I worked as a librarian's aide when I was in high school and junior college. I was a page. I was a page in a library, which I thought was a cool way to put it. I shelved books. Actually, I read more books than I shelved, I think, and I would steal them without checking them out and take them back and read them, and then, you know, get them back on the shelves pretty quickly. But books have always been a great friend, and that's why I wanted to write. So this is me, this is us, and Kathy, this is great. I love seeing all of you guys. I'm going to be in and out all day, and tomorrow we've got a lot going on around here. We're dealing with a death of the family and dealing with an estate. But, you know, I'm actually, this virtual event worked out because I'm here to do the things that I need to do and to help out. So, you know, and I'm always open for questions. If anybody wants to comments or questions out there, I guess we can do that, Kathy, if somebody wants to.
We're going to have to go on to our next panel, but okay. If Mandy has been posting how to reach you and how to contact you, Reavis is on Facebook, and you can